Joining us now, NBC News health and medical reporter Berkeley Lovelace Jr., NBC News senior enterprise reporter Brandy Zadrozny, and senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, Dr. Amish Adalja. Everyone, really good to see you. Berkeley, I want to begin with you. Give us an overview of the HHS. I mean, I said a moment ago that they oversee all, drug approvals and, what we're covered by, what's covered by insurance. What exactly will RFK be able to influence if he is HHS secretary?
Yeah, so he'll have an enormous influence. So within HHS is the CDC, the FDA, the National Institutes of Health, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And so, of course, all of those agencies will have leadership under those different branches of agencies. However, RFK Jr. will be the head of over everyone, so he will have major influence. And also, if you recall, he was being floated as a potential White House health czar. He was also floated as being someone as what's been described as Operation Warp Speed for childhood chronic diseases, and none of those positions would have given him the influence that he'll have now with this position.
Dr. Adalja, expand on that. What could he potentially do if he is confirmed by the Senate?
I think it would be a very destructive influence that he would have. He's not there to actually improve health. I think he's there to destroy it. And when you look at the rhetoric that he's had on vaccines, the way he tries to process that scientific data, or his inability to process that scientific data, to twist it, to evade what it means, I don't think that you can think of this as anything other than, a major political stunt that's going to have dangerous cascading consequences for one of the greatest technologies humans have ever invented, and that's vaccines. And I think his stance on vaccines completely obliterates anything that he might say about any other condition, because it really speaks to how he processes data. And his anti-vaccine rhetoric is held kind of like a religious conviction. It is impervious to the scientific method, to rational argumentation or logic. And this is not a person that you want to have in power. This is a nihilistic destroyer.
Can he actually, does he have the authority to roll back vaccine mandates, to roll back vaccine approvals? Wouldn't he also need the FDA to some degree, Dr. Adalja?
Yes, he would need the FDA. He would also need cooperation from state and local health departments and school districts. A lot of this is done at the state level. But what he would do is give the anti-vaccine movement their strongest advocate in history. And that is going to be very damaging just from the trickle-down effects that it will cause in the lower policy level making parts of the country. And the other issue is that he's talked about allowing vaccine companies to be sued in normal courts. That would basically grind vaccine development to a halt. That's why President Reagan created the vaccine court to stop these frivolous lawsuits from driving vaccine manufacturers out of the industry. They're just going to stop making vaccines if this is something where it's going to be litigious and they're not going to get any return on investment. There are major concerns with what he's saying and what he can do, what he can't do, and what kind of influence he can have on everybody involved in the whole public health apparatus around vaccines.
So he has said in the past he wants Dr. Anthony Fauci to face prosecution. He wants to dismantle and rebuild the FDA, the CDC, and the National Institute of Health, NIH. And he wants NIH to stop studying infectious diseases, which is kind of way out there. Berkeley, in response to this news, what has the reaction been within HHS?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I think the promise that is spooking federal employees the most is his pledge to shake up public health agencies, including FDA, where he says he wants to dismantle entire departments there. So I reported through 4 sources that FDA employees have been preparing for quick exits in the event that RFK was appointed to a prominent health role. And the fear, of course, is that they won't have jobs when he comes in. There's also just a concern that he could make their job harder to do. So RFK has made many false and misleading claims about vaccines, including, as you mentioned, that they are tied to autism. There's a concern that he can influence or delay approvals for new vaccines. He could also just cast doubt about the vaccines that we currently have, which would not be good from a public health standpoint. So there's certainly a lot of anxiety and fear at the FDA right now about that.
So getting back to what I started with, why does Donald Trump need someone, or why would he have someone like RFK surrounding him? Why did he need him during the campaign? Why would he make him this promise to get his endorsement? Who does RFK Jr. bring along with him? What sort of support within the country?
You were watching the Madison Square Garden rally when he introduced RFK after he first endorsed him, and the crowd was uproarious in a way that almost surprised Trump. You could just almost see it on his face, was like very impressed with this, the way he was received. I've seen that kind of reception for the last 10 years, and it's when Kennedy goes into a group of moms, of anti-vaxxers, with his speeches, with his stump speech, with his rhetoric. And, you know, Kennedy has something very, very powerful to provide for the country that most people can't, and it's answers. Easy answers for all that ails us, because he is a conspiracy theorist and has been for years and years. So he, like you said before, has there are real issues that we deal with as a country, including in our health. And he says, I know the answer. I can fix it. I will get an NIH, and I will fire all the corrupt people, and I will have the Attorney General investigate the medical journals who are keeping information from you. I know the information. I will share it. He says in 2 months, he will figure out the cause for all diseases in children. In 2 months, he will just go in, flip a switch, and figure it out. And then in 2 years, he will reverse all of that and make our children healthy again. It is not true. It's not feasible. It's not going to happen. But again, for all of these mothers who are looking for an answer for their children's autism and couldn't find it, he was the answer. And now he's trying to do the same to the country.
Listen to what he wrote in his 2021 book, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. He says he believes that Fauci and Gates are members of a vaccine cartel trying to kill patients by denying them hydroxychloroquine, which we were talking about during the pandemic, and ivermectin. He argues that this cartel secretly funded doctors to produce fraudulent studies showing that the drugs were ineffective against COVID, and that it did so in order to orchestrate global lockdowns and accelerate the construction of 5G cellular networks, in which Kennedy's understanding is that they're very, very bad. I mean, that's pretty out there.
It's crazy talk. It's tinfoil hat time. Like, it really is, like, the broadest of conspiracy theories. But again, that's always sort of been the way that he works. Before, it was, he got famous in 2005 for writing this screed for Rolling Stone, claiming that a bunch of CDC doctors were getting together in a secret meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, and they were conspiring to hide autism. It has always been his thing. It's continuing to be his thing.
Dr. Adalja, one of the other issues here, and I tried to emphasize this, was that we do have a problem with health in this country. Americans are unhealthy. There is a real problem with our weight. There's a real problem with what we consume. We have chronic diseases, chronic disabilities. There is a fundamental problem with what we consume in this country, and he does want to go after that. He says, I don't think there should be ultra-processed foods in school lunches, and that big ag and big pharma do have something to do with that. And beyond the anti-vaxxers, I do think that sort of thing resonates with maybe a broader swath of Americans. How do you build trust back up in an agency like HHS on those issues so that the next person who comes around who says those things isn't also somebody who's a dangerous anti-vaxxer who believes in conspiracy theories?
It's exactly that. You don't put someone at its helm that doesn't believe in science. The same science that's going to be used to tackle chronic diseases, to tackle obesity, is the same science that's behind vaccines. Science is one big whole integrated piece of knowledge that deals with biology. And if someone doesn't believe in biology, and it's clear that he doesn't clearly believe in biology because of what he's been saying, you're not going to create trust. And you're actually going to increase more distrust, and more Americans are going to tune out and say, these experts don't know anything, because one side they're saying this, the other side they're saying this. Some of them don't agree even on the basic science that's behind it. So I don't think that this is going to do anything for any other disease, because this is the wrong person to be tackling any kind of scientific or medical question, because he basically does not have the cognitive processing ability to do this. His thinking is corrupt on this, and it's not open to rational argumentation. So I think this only makes all those other things worse, even if they are his pet causes. He's not going to do them any service. He's just going to push people away from government experts and from experts that are in HHS in the future. And I think this is going to be the long tail of the pandemic. We've had this distrust, and it's only going to get worse with RFK Jr. at the helm.